He waited until the champagne was poured and the music was swelling to destroy my life. My stepbrother called me in the middle of my own engagement party, screaming that our mother had just died from a massive stroke. I left my guests. I left my dignity. I rushed to the hospital in a wedding dress, blinded by tears, only to find him standing there with a camera in my face, laughing because it was all a prank for his internet followers. But the horror did not end there. That was just the opening act. Now, that same monster is sleeping in my guest room. He produced a forged lease, and the police say I cannot make him leave because he has tenant rights. I am a prisoner in the multi-million-dollar home I paid for, hiding behind a locked bedroom door while he destroys my property and invites strangers into my sanctuary. Worst of all, my fiancé, the man who swore to protect me, is downstairs right now, drinking wine with him and telling me that I am the one who is overreacting. How does a successful woman lose her entire life in 48 hours? How do you fight a squatter when the person sleeping next to you is handing him the keys? I am shaking so hard, I can barely type this. I feel like I am going insane. What would you do if the law protected the devil living in your house? My name is Elizabeth Sterling. I am 30 years old, the vice president of marketing for a global cosmetics firm based in Manhattan, and I have spent my entire adult life curating a world where nothing happens by accident. I live in a pristine colonial revival in Greenwich, Connecticut, the kind of town where the grass is measured with a ruler and the neighbors smile with their teeth but never their eyes. To the outside world, I am the woman who has it all: the six-figure salary, the immaculate credit score, the respect of my peers, and the diamond ring on my finger that cost more than my stepfather's car. But perfection is a heavy armor to wear. It suffocates you. It demands that you stand guard 24 hours a day, watching for the cracks. And tonight, at my own engagement party, I was watching for cracks. The venue was the Glass House, a private botanical conservatory I had rented out for the evening. Above us, the night sky was clear, the stars looking down on my 150 guests like silent judges. The air smelled of expensive perfume and imported white peonies. I stood near the bar, sipping sparkling water because I never drink when I am hosting. Control is a currency, and alcohol is inflation. It devalues your judgment. I smoothed the silk of my cream-colored dress, my eyes scanning the room. Everything was precisely as I had planned. The string quartet was playing a soft, unrecognizable melody. The lighting was dimmed to a golden amber hue that made everyone look 5 years younger. It was perfect. It was sterile. It was mine. Then I saw Mark. My fiancé was standing near the entrance to the terrace, clutching a glass of scotch like it was a life raft. Mark is handsome in a soft, non-threatening way. Sandy hair, broad shoulders that slump when he thinks no one is looking, and a smile that usually reaches his eyes. But tonight, that smile was plastered on like a sticker that was starting to peel at the corners. He was checking his phone again. That was the third time in 10 minutes. I felt a prickle of irritation at the base of my neck. We had discussed this. No phones tonight. We were supposed to be the center of attention, the golden couple basking in our well-earned happiness. Why did he look like a man waiting for a sentencing hearing? I walked over to him, my heels clicking softly on the polished concrete floor. As I approached, he shoved the phone into his pocket, a little too quickly. "Everything okay?" I asked, keeping my voice low, sweet, but firm. It was the tone I used when a junior copywriter missed a deadline. Mark jumped slightly. "Oh, hey, Liz. Yeah, everything is fine. Just Sao Tsing Ho, Ling. 2 hash is greater than work stuff. You know how the merger is going. His eyes darted past me, scanning the crowd. He was lying. I knew Mark's tells. When he lied, he touched his earlobe. His fingers were pulling at it right now. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Not fear, exactly, but suspicion. I reached out and straightened his tie, a gesture that looked affectionate to the guests, but was actually a restraint. Put the phone away. Mark, I whispered, smiling for the benefit of the watching crowd. You are making me nervous. And when I get nervous, I get difficult. He let out a breathy laugh, forced and hollow. You are right. Sorry, babe. You look stunning. By the way, he kissed my forehead, but his lips felt cold. I watched him walk away toward the buffet, his shoulders tight. My mind began to race. Was it cold feet? Was it another woman? Or was it just his inherent weakness? That inability to handle pressure that I had always found endearing, but was now starting to find exhausting? I took a deep breath, forcing myself to reset. I would deal with Mark later. Tonight was about appearances. I circulated the room, accepting compliments like currency. So happy for you. Elizabeth, you two make a wonderful couple. The flowers are exquisite. I nodded, thanked them, and played the part of the blushing bride-to-be. But my mind was drifting to the one person who was not here. Kevin, my stepbrother, the stain on my carefully bleached life. I had made the executive decision 2 months ago not to invite him. It was not cruel. It was necessary. Kevin was 22 years old, unemployed by choice, and possessed an entitlement so profound it bordered on pathology. He was the kind of person who would show up to a black tie event in a stained hoodie, drink too much of the open bar, and make a scene just to prove that he did not care about your pretentious rules. I remembered the last time I saw him. He had asked to borrow $500 for a business investment that turned out to be online poker. When I refused, he had called me a selfish witch who had forgotten where she came from. No, I would not let him ruin tonight. I had worked too hard to escape the chaos of my childhood home. The shouting matches, the unpaid bills, the constant drama. Kevin was the living embodiment of that chaos. Keeping him away was not just a preference. It was a survival strategy. My phone buzzed in my clutch purse. I ignored it. It buzzed again and again. A long, sustained vibration that felt like an insect trapped against my hip. Excuse me, I said to the wife of my chief executive officer, stepping away from the conversation with a polite nod. I walked to a quiet corner near a massive fern, shielding myself from the guests. I pulled the phone out. My heart skipped a beat. The caller identification flashed a picture of Kevin, a selfie he had taken where he was flipping off the camera. I stared at the screen. Why was he calling? He knew tonight was the party. He knew he was not invited. Was he drunk? Was he calling to scream at me? Do not answer it. A voice inside my head warned, it is a trap. It is always a trap. But then, a darker thought intruded. What if he was outside? What if he was at the front gate, making a scene with security? The thought of my chief executive officer seeing my delinquent stepbrother being dragged away by police was enough to make my blood run cold. I had to manage this. I had to control it. I slid my finger across the screen and pressed the phone to my ear. What do you want? Kevin? I hissed, my voice dripping with venom. If you are outside, I swear to God I will. Elizabeth? His voice cut through my anger like a serrated knife. It was not the slurred, mocking tone I expected. It was high-pitched, breathless, broken. Elizabeth, you have to... Sao yu ting hao ling dva. Oh my God. I do not know what to do. The background noise on his end was chaotic. Sirens? Traffic? I could not tell. My grip on the phone tightened. Kevin, what is going on? Stop crying and speak clearly. It is Mom. He sobbed. The sound was guttural, wet with panic. We were just... Sao yu ting hao ling. 2 hashes greater than... We were watching television and she just... Sao yu ting hao ling. 2 hash is greater than. She grabbed her head. Liz. She started shaking and then she just dropped on the floor. The world around me seemed to tilt on its axis. The string quartet, the laughter of the guests, the clinking of glasses. It all faded into a dull roar, like static on a television. What are you talking about? I asked, my voice trembling. I think it is a stroke, Kevin screamed. His panic was infectious. A virus transmitting through the cellular network. The ambulance is here. They are putting her on the stretcher. She is not moving. Liz. She is not waking up. Her face is all twisted. Sao yu ting hao ling. 2. Oh God. There is so much saliva. Sao yu ting hao ling. R. Ting hao dayu. My knees felt weak. I reached out and grabbed the cold metal railing of a planter to steady myself. My mother... She was only 55. She had high blood pressure. Yes, but a stroke? Where are you? I demanded, my marketing executive brain trying to take over, trying to organize the disaster. Which hospital? St. Mary's. He gasped. They are taking her to St. Mary's. You have to come, please. Liz, I cannot do this alone. She might. Sao yu ting hao ling. 2 hashes greater than. She might not make it. The line went dead. I stood there, frozen. The phone slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the floor, cracking the screen protector. Suddenly, the party felt grotesque. The expensive flowers looked like funeral arrangements. The laughter of the guests sounded like mocking cackles. How could they laugh? Did not they know? I looked across the room and saw Mark. He was laughing at something a colleague said. His head thrown back. He looked so carefree, so oblivious. Mark, I screamed. The sound tore out of my throat, unrefined and raw. It was not the voice of Elizabeth Sterling, the polished executive. It was the voice of a terrified daughter. The room went silent. Heads turned. The string quartet faltered and stopped. 150 pairs of eyes fixed on me. I did not care. I did not care about the image, or the decorum, or the months of planning. Mark rushed over, his face pale. Liz? What is it? What happened? I grabbed his lapels, my fingers digging into the expensive fabric of his tuxedo. It is Mom. I choked out, tears finally spilling over. Hot and stinging. Kevin called. She had a stroke. She is dying. Mark, we have to go. Now, a murmur went through the crowd. I saw pity in their eyes, mixed with the morbid curiosity that people always have for other people's tragedies. Mark looked stunned. A stroke? Are you sure? Maybe we should call back and verify. Verify? I shrieked, shoving him back. My mother is in an ambulance. Get the car. I did not wait for him. I turned and ran. I ran through the crowd of my exquisitely dressed guests, knocking over a waiter holding a tray of champagne flutes. The sound of shattering glass echoed behind me, a fitting soundtrack for the destruction of my perfect night. I burst out of the double doors into the cool night air, my chest heaving. I scrambled into the passenger seat of our Range Rover. my hands shaking so badly I could barely buckle my seatbelt. Mark jumped into the driver's seat a moment later. He fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking too. But as he started the engine, I glanced at him. He did not look sad. He did not look devastated. He looked so yuting howling. 2 hashes greater than relieved. For a second, just a split second, I wondered why a man whose future mother-in-law might be dying would look relieved to be leaving his own engagement party. But the thought was swept away by the tidal wave of panic crashing over me. "Drive!" I yelled. Mark slammed on the gas, and we peeled out of the gravel driveway, leaving the perfect party, the perfect flowers, and my perfect reputation in a cloud of dust. As we sped toward the highway, I stared out the window at the blurring lights of the suburbs. I felt a crushing weight of guilt. I had not invited Kevin. I had judged him. I had cast him aside. And now, he was the one holding my dying mother's hand while I was sipping sparkling water and worrying about napkins. I am a monster, I thought, the tears streaming down my face. I am a cold, heartless monster, and this is my punishment. I pulled my phone out and dialed Kevin's number again, desperate for an update, desperate for him to tell me she was breathing. It went straight to voicemail. I gripped the phone until my knuckles turned white. I did not know it then, but as the car merged onto the interstate, speeding toward a tragedy that felt all too real, I was not racing toward my mother's bedside. I was racing into a trap, and the jaws were about to snap shut. The drive to St. Mary's Hospital was a blur of motion and nausea. I sat in the passenger seat of the Range Rover, gripping the leather door handle so tightly that my fingers began to cramp. Outside the window, the Connecticut suburbs whipped by in streaks of yellow and red light, distorted by the speed at which Mark was driving. He was doing 80 miles per hour in a 55 zone. But for once, I did not admonish him. I wanted him to go faster. Every second felt like a theft. I kept picturing my mother lying on a cold linoleum floor, her face slack, her eyes searching for a daughter who was too busy sipping sparkling water to answer her phone. The guilt was a physical weight in my chest, heavy and suffocating. I began to bargain with the universe, a desperate internal negotiation that I had not engaged in since I was a child. Please let her be alive. If she survives this, I will be better. I will visit every Sunday instead of every other Sunday. I will listen to her stories about her garden without checking my email. I will even be nicer to Kevin. Just let her be okay. Mark was silent beside me. His eyes were fixed on the road, his jaw set. I looked at him, searching for comfort, but he seemed distant. He was not reaching over to squeeze my hand. He was not offering words of reassurance. He was just driving, mechanically, like a chauffeur delivering a client to a business meeting rather than a fiancé rushing his future wife to a tragedy. We screeched into the emergency room parking lot, the tires protesting against the asphalt. Mark barely had the car in park before I threw the door open. I stumbled out, my heels catching on the uneven pavement. My expensive cream dress, which had been the envy of every woman in the room 20 minutes ago, was now just a hindrance. I gathered the silk skirt in my fists and ran toward the automatic sliding doors. The air inside the emergency room was a shock, cold, sterile, and smelling of rubbing alcohol and old coffee. It was the smell of bad news. I rushed to the intake desk. The receptionist was a heavy-set woman with tired eyes, typing slowly on a keyboard. She did not look up when I slammed my hands onto the counter. "My mother?" I gasped, breathless and trembling. "Judith Sterling. She was just brought in by ambulance." Stroke. Where is she? The woman looked up, her expression impassive. She adjusted her glasses and looked me up and down, taking in the disheveled hair and the ball gown. Last name? She asked, her voice flat. Sterling, I repeated, my voice rising to a frantic pitch. Or maybe under her maiden name. Miller? Please. Just check. Her son called me. He said it was critical. The woman sighed, a long, exasperated sound, and turned back to her screen. Her fingers tapped out a rhythm that felt agonizingly slow. I looked back at the entrance. Mark had just walked in. He was not running. He was walking at a brisk but controlled pace. He adjusted his jacket as he approached. I turned back to the receptionist. Well, I demanded. She frowned at the screen. Ma'am, we have had no ambulance arrivals in the last hour, and I have no patient named Judith Sterling or Judith Miller in the system. My heart stopped. The world seemed to freeze. That is impossible, I said, my voice barely a whisper. My brother called me. He said the paramedics were there. He said, Sao Yu Jing Hao Ling. 2 hash is greater than he said. Her face was twisted. The receptionist looked at me with a mixture of annoyance and pity. I am telling you what is on the screen. No one by that name is here. Maybe you have the wrong hospital? No. This is the only hospital for 20 miles. I spun around, scanning the waiting room, looking for a sign, a paramedic, anything. The room was filled with the usual Friday night misery. A child holding a bloody towel to his chin, an old man coughing into a handkerchief, a teenager looking pale and sick. And then I saw him, sitting in the far corner, near the vending machines, was Kevin. He was not crying. He was not pacing. He was sitting with his legs stretched out, ankles crossed, wearing a faded hoodie and ripped jeans. He was holding his phone up, the camera lens pointed directly at me. As our eyes locked, a slow, wide grin spread across his face. I felt the blood drain from my head. My vision tunneled. I walked toward him, my legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. Kevin? I whispered. Where is Mom? Kevin did not answer immediately. He kept the phone steady, tracking my movement. Then, he let out a laugh. It was a sharp, barking sound that cut through the quiet murmur of the waiting room. Say cheese. Liz, he said, his voice loud and mocking. You are live on TikTok. I stopped 3 feet away from him. My brain could not process the data. The inputs were conflicting. Mom dying, Kevin laughing, the phone recording. What? I asked dumbly. It is a prank. You idiot, Kevin said, lowering the phone slightly but keeping the camera rolling. Mom is fine. She is at home watching Netflix. I just wanted to see if you actually had a heart, or if it was made of plastic, like your credit cards. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the hum of the vending machine beside him. I could hear the beating of my own heart, a frantic drum against my ribs. A prank? I repeated. The words felt foreign in my mouth. Yeah, Kevin said, standing up. He towered over me, slouching but still taller. He looked down at me with a sneer that was pure malice. You did not invite me to the party. Liz, you thought you could just cut me out? Pretend I do not exist? Well, guess what? I just crashed your party. And look at you. He gestured to my dress, which was now wrinkled and stained with a spot of grease from the car door. You look like a wreck. He laughed. And the internet loves it. 5,000 views already. People love seeing the Ice Queen melt. I stood there, vibrating, the The relief that my mother was alive was instantly incinerated by a rage so white-hot it felt like it might burn my skin off. This was not a joke. This was psychological warfare. He had weaponized my love for my mother, the one person I would burn the world down for, and used it to humiliate me. I looked around for Mark. He was standing a few feet behind me. He had heard everything. "Mark," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed violence. "Did you hear him?" Mark looked at Kevin, then at me. He let out a sigh, rubbing the back of his neck. "Kevin, that was Saütsing Halin. 2 hash is greater than. That was really messed up." "Man," Mark said. His tone lacked any real fire. It sounded like he was scolding a puppy for chewing a slipper, not a grown man for faking a death. Kevin shrugged. "She deserved it. She embarrassed me. Now we are even." "Even?" I stepped forward, my hands balling into fists. I felt a violent impulse rise in my throat, a desire to snatch that phone and smash it into his smiling face. "You think this makes us even? You told me our mother was dying. I was testing you." Kevin shot back, his grin faltering just a fraction as he saw the look in my eyes. "And hey, you passed. You actually came. I am surprised. I thought you would stay for the cake." I closed my eyes for a second. In the darkness behind my eyelids, I saw the party I had left behind. The ruined evening, the guests whispering, the money wasted. But more than that, I felt the fool. I had been played, and the worst part was, he was enjoying it. He was feeding on my distress like a parasite. I opened my eyes. The heat in my chest had turned to ice. A cold, clinical detachment washed over me. This was the Elizabeth who fired underperforming employees without blinking. This was the Elizabeth who negotiated contracts with sharks. "Get in the car." "Mark," I said. My voice was low and deadly calm. "Liz, wait." Mark started. "Now," I commanded. Turning on my heel, I did not look at Kevin again. I did not give him the satisfaction of a scream or a slap that would look great on his video. I walked out of the hospital with my head high, though inside, something vital had shattered. The drive back to my house was silent. Mark tried to turn on the radio, but I reached over and turned it off. "He is just a kid." "Liz," Mark said after 10 minutes of suffocating silence. He did not mean it to be this bad. He just wanted attention. I turned my head slowly to look at him. In the passing streetlights, Mark's profile looked weak, soft. He is 22 years old. "Mark," I said, "he is not a kid. He is a sociopath. And you, Saütsing Haling, are Jinghao Dayu." I trailed off. I wanted to ask him why he was not angrier. I wanted to ask why he had looked relieved to leave the party. But I did not. I was too exhausted. I needed to act. Words were useless now. When we pulled into the driveway of our home, I did not go inside to cry. I did not go to the bedroom to take off my ruined dress. I walked straight to the detached garage. Kevin had been storing his overflow belongings here for 6 months. It was supposed to be temporary, a favor I did for Mom while he looked for an apartment he never intended to find. There were boxes of clothes, a dusty PlayStation, a collection of limited edition sneakers he claimed were an investment, and piles of comic books. I hit the button to open the garage door. The motor whirred, lifting the heavy metal sheet. "Liz, what are you doing?" Mark asked, getting out of the car. I walked to the first box, marked Kevin, winter clothes. I picked it up. It was heavy, but adrenaline gave me strength. I walked to the end of the driveway, right to the curb where the garbage trucks came on Tuesdays. I threw the box down. It hit the asphalt with a satisfying thud, bursting open slightly. A wool coat spilled out onto the dirty street. "Liz, stop." Mark ran over, grabbing my arm. "You cannot do this. It is going to rain tonight." I ripped my arm away from him. "I do not care if it snows." I hissed. He wanted a reaction? He has got one. He is out. Every single thing he owns is going out. I went back for the next box. Then the next. I worked with mechanical efficiency. Sneakers, video games, high school yearbooks. I dragged a mattress protector out and tossed it on top of the pile. Mark stood by the car, watching me. He looked useless. He pulled out his phone and started typing rapidly. "Warning, Kevin? Complaining to a friend?" I did not care. By the time I was finished, there was a mountain of personal effects on the curb. My dress was ruined, the hem torn and black with grease, my hair wild. I stood there, panting, staring at the pile of trash that represented my stepbrother's life. Headlights swept across the lawn. A car was pulling up. It was a beige sedan. I knew that car. It belonged to my Aunt Sarah. Of course, Kevin had called the cavalry. The car door slammed, and Aunt Sarah marched up the driveway. She was a short, stout woman with hair dyed a harsh shade of burgundy and a perpetual look of victimhood etched into her features. She had always doted on Kevin, the poor, fatherless boy, while treating me, the successful one, as an automated teller machine that had gained sentience. "Elizabeth," she screeched, "what in God's name are you doing?" I crossed my arms over my chest. "I am taking out the trash." "Sarah." Sarah looked at the pile of boxes, then at me, her face twisted in disgust. "You heartless girl." He told me what happened. It was a joke, a harmless prank. He is a young boy with a playful spirit, and you act like Hao Ling Deva, like a maniac, a harmless prank. I stepped into her personal space. She smelled of cigarettes and cheap vanilla lotion. He told me my mother was dying. Sarah. He let me drive to the hospital in a panic. He filmed my reaction to post on the internet. "So?" Sarah threw her hands up. "You are always so serious. So stiff. You need to lighten up." He was just testing to see if you cared. Because Lord knows you act like you are better than all of us with your fancy house and your fancy parties. I stared at her. The gaslighting was breathtaking in its audacity. She was looking at a woman who had just been traumatized and telling her she was the villain for not laughing. "Get off my property." "Sarah," I said quietly. "Oh, I am not going anywhere." She spat. "And neither is Kevin's stuff. You are going to apologize to him. You hurt his feelings. You damaged his self-esteem." "Elizabeth, do you know how fragile he is?" I looked at Mark, expecting him to step in, to defend me, to tell this delusional woman to leave. Mark was looking at his shoes. I looked back at Sarah. A cold realization settled over me. This was not a family. This was a parasitic organism, and I was the host. "No," I said, "I am done apologizing. Take his stuff, or leave it for the garbage men. I do not care, but if he sets foot on this driveway again, I will call the police." I turned and walked toward the front door. "You will regret this," Sarah screamed after me. "You think you are so high and mighty, but you will fall. Elizabeth, you will fall." I slammed the heavy oak door shut, cutting off her voice. The silence of the house enveloped me. I leaned my back against the door and slid down until I was sitting on the cold floor of the foyer. I looked at my hands. They were shaking, not from fear anymore, but from the terrifying certainty that the prank at the hospital was not the end of something. It was just the beginning. The morning sun hit the pristine white siding of my colonial revival with a cheerfulness that felt offensive. I stood at the kitchen island, clutching a mug of black coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. My head was throbbing, a dull, rhythmic pulse behind my eyes that served as a reminder of the previous night's disaster. I had slept for maybe 2 hours, fitful bursts of unconsciousness, interrupted by nightmares of ambulances and laughing clowns. I looked out the bay window toward the street. The pile of Kevin's belongings was still there at the curb, a jagged scar on the manicured landscape of our neighborhood. A cardboard box had tipped over, spilling a cascade of colorful comic books onto the dew-soaked grass. It looked trashy. It looked like chaos. It looked like everything I had spent 30 years running away from. Mark walked into the kitchen, rubbing his face. He was wearing his running gear, but he did not look like he was going for a run. He looked like a man trying to find a reason to leave the house. "Did you sleep?" he asked, avoiding my eyes. "No," I said flatly. "I am going to call the junk removal service as soon as they open at 8. I want that pile gone before the neighbors start posting about it on the Homeowners Association message board. Mrs. Gable across the street is probably already drafting a complaint about property values." Mark poured himself a glass of water. "Liz, maybe we should have just Saoyuting Haoling. 2 is greater than I do not know. Put it in the garage." Throwing it on the street was intense. I set my mug down with a sharp clink against the granite counter. "Intense?" I turned to him. "Intense is faking a stroke. Mark, intense is humiliating your sister on the internet for 5,000 strangers. Throwing out his trash is not intense. It is hygiene." Before Mark could respond, a flash of blue and red light swept across the kitchen walls. It was followed by a short, sharp siren chirp, the sound of authority demanding attention. My stomach dropped. I walked to the window. A police cruiser was parked at the end of our driveway, blocking the entrance. And standing next to it, talking to 2 uniformed officers with animated hand gestures, was Kevin. He was not wearing the hoodie from last night. He was wearing a clean button-down shirt and khakis. He looked respectable. He looked like a victim. "What is he doing here?" Mark asked, coming up behind me. I did not answer. I marched to the front door, adrenaline flooding my system, washing away the fatigue. I threw the door open and walked down the brick path, my spine stiff, my face arranged into a mask of polite confusion. "Officers," I called out as I approached. "Is there a problem?" The 2 officers turned. One was an older man with a gray mustache and a name tag that read Sergeant Miller. The other was younger, female, with a skeptical expression. Kevin stood slightly behind them, looking at the ground, playing the part of the downtrodden boy perfectly. "Ma'am, are you Elizabeth Sterling?" Sergeant Miller asked. His voice was heavy, the tone of a man who had dealt with too many domestic disputes before breakfast. "I am," I said, stopping 10 feet away. "And this is my property." That individual, I pointed a manicured finger at Kevin, "is trespassing. I would like him removed." Kevin sniffled. Aloud. "Wet sound. He is good." I thought, "He is really, really good." The officer looked at his notepad. "Ma'am, this gentleman, Mr. Kevin Miller, called us to report an illegal eviction. He claims you physically removed his belongings from the residence and changed the locks while he was out." I let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Illegal eviction?" Officer, he does not live here. He is a guest, an unwelcome guest who overstayed his welcome and harassed me. I put his things out because he does not reside at this address. Kevin stepped forward, his voice trembling just the right amount. Liz, how can you say that? I have lived here for 6 months. This is my home. I have nowhere else to go. He is lying, I said, my voice icy. He has stayed here occasionally. He couch surfs. He contributes nothing. He is not a tenant. Sergeant Miller sighed and hitched up his duty belt. Ma'am, in the state of Connecticut, if an individual has resided in a property for more than 30 days or receives mail at the address, they establish tenancy rights. It does not matter if they pay rent or not. You cannot just throw them out. That is a constructive eviction, and it is against the law. My jaw tightened. I know the law, officer, but he is not a tenant. He is a squatter at best, actually, Kevin said softly, reaching into a manila folder he was holding. I have a lease. I froze. A lease? He pulled out a document and handed it to the sergeant. The officer adjusted his glasses and read it over, nodding slowly. I stared at the paper. It looked official. Show me that, I demanded. The officer handed it to me. My hands shook as I took the paper. It was a standard residential lease agreement, dated 6 months ago. It listed Kevin Miller as the tenant and Elizabeth Sterling as the landlord. It stipulated a rent of $0 in exchange for property maintenance services. And there, at the bottom, was my signature. I stared at the ink. It was my signature. The loop of the E, the sharp cross of the 10. It was identical to how I signed everything, but I had never seen this document in my life. Then, I saw it, the faint crease line near the bottom of the page, the slight difference in the font of the main text compared to the signature block. My mind flashed back to a year ago. Kevin had wanted to buy a used Honda Civic. He needed a co-signer because his credit score was non-existent. I had been busy, rushing to a meeting. He had shoved a stack of papers in front of me at the kitchen table. Just sign here, Liz. And here, it is just the standard liability waiver. I had signed without reading. I had trusted him. He had cut my signature from that document and photocopied it onto this one. Or perhaps he had slipped a blank page into the stack I signed. This is a forgery, I said, my voice rising. I never signed a lease. He took my signature from a car loan document. Look at the pixelation on the signature line. This is fraud. Kevin looked at the officer, eyes wide and innocent. I do not know what she is talking about. We signed that when I moved in. She said she wanted it in writing, so I would be responsible for mowing the lawn. It is fake, I screamed, losing my composure. Arrest him for fraud. Ma'am, calm down, the female officer said, her hand resting near her belt. Sergeant Miller took the paper back. Look, Miss Sterling, I am not a forensic document analyst. To me, this looks like a valid lease with your signature on it. If you claim it is a forgery, that is a matter for the civil courts. You will have to sue him and prove it in front of a judge. But right now, I continued, feeling the walls of reality closing in. Right now, the sergeant said firmly, he has a lease. He has belongings on the premises. He has established residency. You cannot lock him out. That is a criminal offense. You have 2 choices. You can let him back in and give him a key, or we can arrest you for illegal eviction. The word hung in the morning air. Arrest. I looked at my neighbors' houses. I saw Mrs. Gable peering through her blinds. I saw Mr. Henderson pausing while walking his dog to watch the spectacle. Elizabeth Sterling, the neighborhood perfectionist, being handcuffed on her own front lawn. I looked at Mark. He was standing on the porch, watching. He did not come down. He did not argue. He just stood there, useless as a statue. I looked at Kevin. He was not looking at the officers anymore. He was looking at me, and in his eyes, I saw a deep, bottomless well of malice. He knew he had won. He had weaponized the very system I paid taxes to uphold. He had turned the law into a bludgeon and was beating me to death with it. I cannot believe this, I whispered. The sergeant looked sympathetic but unmoved. It is a civil matter. Ma'am, if you want him out, you have to file for eviction at the housing court. The process usually takes 30 to 60 days, until a judge signs an order. This is his home too. 30 days. 30 days of living with the monster who left while I thought my mother was dying. Fine, I spat out. The word tasted like bile. I turned and walked back to the house, past Mark, into the kitchen. I grabbed the spare key from the junk drawer, the drawer where I kept things I did not know what to do with, which now apparently included my dignity. I walked back outside and threw the key at Kevin. It hit him in the chest and fell into the grass. There, I said, now get your trash off my curb. Thank you. Liz, Kevin said, picking up the key. He looked at the officers. Thank you for protecting my rights. Officers, I really appreciate it. Just keep it civil. Folks, Sergeant Miller said, have a nice day. The police got back into their cruiser. I stood there and watched as Kevin began to pick up his boxes. He whistled a cheerful tune as he carried the first box, the one with his comic books, past me and up the driveway. As he passed me, he paused. He leaned in close, so close I could smell the mint of his toothpaste. I told you, Liz, he whispered, you should have invited me to the party. Now, the party comes to you. He walked into my house. I stood alone on the driveway. The sun was fully up now, bright and blinding. The birds were singing. The sprinklers hissed to life on the neighbor's lawn. It was a beautiful Saturday morning in suburbia, but inside my chest, something dark and terrified was uncurling. I realized then that I had made a critical error. I had assumed that because I was successful, because I was wealthy, because I followed the rules, I was safe. I was wrong. I walked back into the house. Kevin was already in the living room. He had dropped his box on my white Persian rug, dirt and grass staining the pristine wool. He was opening the refrigerator, taking out a carton of orange juice, and drinking directly from the carton. Mark was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, looking uncomfortable. So, Mark said, his voice hesitant, I guess he is staying? I looked at my fiancé. I looked at the man who was supposed to be my partner, my protector, and I saw nothing but a void. Yes, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. He is staying. I walked past them both, up the stairs, and into the master bedroom. I locked the door. It was a futile gesture. I knew locks meant nothing to people like Kevin. Rules meant nothing. I went into the walk-in closet and sat down on the floor, surrounded by my designer shoes and silk blouses. I pulled my knees to my chest. 30 days. I had to survive 30 days. But as I listened to the sound of the television turning on downstairs, the volume blasting loud enough to shake the floorboards, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was not going to leave in 30 days. He was never going to leave. I closed my eyes and let the first tear fall. It was hot and angry, Think, Elizabeth, I told myself, you are smarter than him. You are stronger than him. He has a fake piece of paper. You have resources. But then, a darker thought crept in, a whisper from the back of my mind. What if resources are not enough? What if the only way to beat a monster is to become one? I heard a crash from downstairs. Something glass shattering. Then Kevin's voice, shouting, "Oops, my bad." I did not move. I sat in the dark, listening to the invasion of my life. And for the first time in 30 years, I had absolutely no plan. It had been 5 days since the occupation began. 5 days of waking up to the sound of heavy bass vibrating through the floorboards at 3 in the morning. 5 days of finding sticky rings of condensation on my mahogany coffee table. 5 days of walking through my own home like a ghost, haunting the hallways of a life that no longer belonged to me. My sanctuary had been breached, and the infection was spreading. I arrived home from the office late on a Wednesday evening. The sun had already set, casting long, bruised shadows across the lawn. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw 3 cars I did not recognize parked haphazardly on the grass. Not on the pavement, but on the Kentucky bluegrass I paid a landscaping service $400 a month to maintain. My grip tightened on the steering wheel until the leather groaned. I stepped out of the car and the smell hit me instantly. It was the sweet, skunky stench of marijuana, mixed with the acrid smoke of cheap cigarettes. It was drifting from my open living room windows. I marched up the front steps, my heels clicking like gunshots on the stone. I pushed the door open. The scene inside was grotesque. My living room, usually a study in minimalist elegance with its cream sofas and abstract art, looked like a frat house after a football victory. There were at least 6 people lounging on my furniture. Strangers, men with neck tattoos, and women with heavy makeup who looked at me with bored, glassy eyes. Kevin was in the center of it all, sitting on the arm of my favorite reading chair, holding a red plastic cup. He looked like a king holding court in a palace he had conquered without firing a shot. "Hey, Liz," Kevin shouted over the thumping hip-hop music. "You are home early. Grab a beer. We are just chilling." I stood in the foyer, clutching my briefcase. My eyes scanned the room. There was a cigarette burn on the rug. A coaster was overturned. A half-eaten slice of pizza sat directly on the silk upholstery of the ottoman. "Get out," I said. My voice was low, trembling with a rage so profound it felt cold. Kevin laughed. He turned to his friends. "See? I told you she was uptight." I walked over to the stereo system and yanked the power cord out of the wall. The music died instantly, leaving a ringing silence in the room. I said, "Get out," I repeated, turning to face the strangers. "This is private property. You are trespassing. If you are not out of this house in 60 seconds, I am calling the police." One of the men, a guy with a shaved head and a snake tattoo curling up his neck, stood up slowly. He looked at Kevin. "Not me. Kev, is this chick for real?" Kevin Sehil, setting his cup down on a bookshelf, without a coaster. "It is fine, guys. She is just having a mood." "Liz, you know the law. As a tenant, I have the right to have guests. You cannot bar my visitors. That is harassment." I stepped into his space. I could smell the alcohol on his breath. Guests are one thing. Kevin, a drug den is another. I smell the weed. I see the damage to the furniture. That voids any tenant rights you think you have. Now get them out. Or, I swear to God, I will have every single one of them arrested for possession. I locked eyes with him. For a moment, We stood there, a silent battle of wills. He saw that I was on the edge. He saw that I was ready to burn the house down with everyone inside if I had to. He rolled his eyes. Fine. You guys better bounce. My sister is having a power trip. We will meet up at Mike's place later. The group grumbled and shuffled out, casting dirty looks in my direction. The guy with the snake tattoo deliberately bumped my shoulder as he passed. I did not flinch. I stood my ground until the last of them was gone and the front door slammed shut. Kevin flopped onto the sofa, putting his feet up on the coffee table. His shoes were still on. You are such a killjoy. Liz, you have no friends, do you? That is why Mark looks so miserable all the time. I ignored him. I could not speak to him. If I opened my mouth, I would scream, and if I started screaming, I would not stop until my throat bled. I turned and walked upstairs. I needed to breathe. I needed to verify that there was still one corner of this house that was mine. I went into the master bedroom and locked the door. Mark was not home yet. He was working late, or so he said. I went into the walk-in closet, pushing aside the rows of evening gowns and blazers. I knelt down and pulled away the loose floorboard in the back corner, revealing the small wall safe I had installed 5 years ago. It was my secret, my insurance policy. Inside was my emergency fund, $50,000 in cash, and the jewelry I had inherited from my grandmother, a heavy gold necklace, diamond earrings, and a vintage emerald brooch worth more than Kevin's entire existence. I punched in the code, 1984, my birth year. Simple, but effective. The light on the keypad blinked green. The lock clicked. I pulled the heavy steel door open. My heart stopped beating. The safe was empty. I blinked, sure that my eyes were deceiving me. I reached inside, my hand grasping at empty air. I felt the cold metal of the interior walls. Nothing. No velvet pouches. No stacks of $100 bills. It was all gone. A sound escaped my throat. A high-pitched whimper of disbelief. I scrambled backward, staring at the open safe as if it were a gaping mouth that had swallowed my future. Kevin. It had to be Kevin. He had been in the house all day with his criminal friends. They had ransacked the place. They had found it. I stood up, my legs shaking violently. I was going to kill him. I was going to walk downstairs, pick up a kitchen knife, and end this nightmare. The front door downstairs opened. "Honey, I am home," Mark's voice called out, cheerful and oblivious. I ran out of the closet, out of the bedroom, and to the top of the stairs. Mark was standing in the foyer, loosening his tie. He looked up and saw my face. His smile vanished. "Liz, what is wrong? You look like you have seen a ghost." "He robbed me," I screamed. The sound echoed through the high ceilings. "Kevin, he broke into the safe. Everything is gone. Mark, the money, Grandma's necklace, everything." Mark's face went pale. He dropped his briefcase. "What? The safe? Are you sure?" I ran down the stairs, grabbing his arm. "Call the police. Mark, right now. This is grand larceny. This is a felony. He is going to prison for 10 years. Call them." I reached for the phone on the hallway table, but Mark's hand shot out and clamped over my wrist. "Wait, Liz, stop." I looked at him, confused. His grip was tight, too tight. "Stop?" I pulled my hand away. "What do you mean? Stop?" "He stole $50,000. Mark licked his lips. Sweat was beading on his forehead. "Liz, think about this. If you call the police, They will come here. They will arrest him. It will be all over the news. Marketing executive's brother arrested for theft. Your company hates scandal. You could lose your job. I stared at him. My job? You are worried about my job? Mark, he stole our savings. And Saoyutsing Haolin, 2# is greater than think about your mother. Mark continued, his voice taking on a desperate, pleading tone. She is fragile. Liz. She barely survived the shock of the engagement party. If Kevin goes to prison, it will kill her. Literally kill her. Do you want that on your conscience? I stepped back from him. The air in the hallway felt suddenly thin. Hard to breathe. Mark, why are you defending him? I am not defending him, Mark said quickly, holding his hands up. I am just trying to manage the situation. Look, maybe he just Saoyutsing Haoling, 2# is greater than borrowed it. You know he has debts. Maybe we can talk to him, convince him to return it. We can handle this as a family. Borrowed it? I whispered. You do not borrow $50,000 in antique diamonds. Mark, you steal them. And how did he get into the safe? Only 2 people know the combination. Me and you. The silence that fell between us was heavy and suffocating. Mark looked away. He could not hold my gaze. He adjusted his cufflink, his fingers trembling slightly. It is a simple code. Liz, he mumbled. Your birth year. Maybe he guessed it. He knows when you were born. I looked at the man I was supposed to marry in 3 months. I looked at the sweat on his upper lip. I looked at the way his eyes darted toward the living room where Kevin was sitting, probably listening to every word. And in that moment, the first real crack appeared in the foundation of my life. It was not just Kevin. Kevin was a blunt instrument. But Mark, Saoyutsing Haoling, 2# is greater than Mark was supposed to be the shield. I felt a coldness settle in my stomach. It was the feeling of realization, the feeling of the ground beneath your feet turning into quicksand. Fine, I said. My voice was flat, dead. Fine? Mark asked, blinking. Fine. We will not call the police. Yet, Mark let out a breath, his shoulders sagging in relief. Good. That is good. Liz, we will talk to him in the morning. When everyone is calm, we will work this out. He reached out to touch my arm, but I stepped back. I have a headache, I said. I am going to bed. I turned and walked back up the stairs. I did not look back. I could feel Mark watching me, could feel the relief radiating off him, and it made my skin crawl. I went into the bedroom and closed the door, but I did not go to bed. I sat at my vanity table and stared at my reflection in the mirror. I looked tired. I looked weak. I looked like a victim. He knows. I thought, Mark knows more than he is saying. He did not seem surprised that the money was gone. He only seemed terrified of the police. I opened my laptop. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I was done shouting. Shouting accomplished nothing. Shouting just gave the enemy information about your emotional state. I navigated to a spy equipment website. I needed eyes. I needed to see what happened in this house when I was at work. I needed to see what my fiancé and my stepbrother said to each other when they thought I was not listening. I added 4 items to my cart. Item 1, 4K hidden camera disguised as a smoke detector. Item 2, universal serial bus charger block with pinhole camera and audio. Item 3, digital voice recorder with magnet mount. Item 4, global positioning system vehicle tracker. I selected overnight shipping. The cost was irrelevant. I clicked purchase. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark. Downstairs. I could hear the television turn on again. I could hear Mark's voice, low and murmuring. And then Kevin's laugh. They were talking. They were conspiring. Let them laugh. I thought, a cold resolve hardening in my chest like concrete. Let them think they have won. Let them think Elizabeth Sterling is a pushover who cares more about her reputation than her justice. The spiral had begun. My perfect life was spinning down the drain. But as I sat there in the darkness, listening to the murmurs of the men who were destroying me, I decided that if I was going down, I was going to drag them down with me. I would watch, I would listen, I would record, and when I had enough, I would not call the police. The police were too kind. I would burn them both to the ground. The call came at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I was in the middle of a strategy meeting, dissecting the quarterly analytics for a new anti-aging cream. My phone vibrated against the mahogany conference table, a harsh buzz that cut through the silence of the boardroom. I glanced at the screen. Aunt Sarah. My first instinct was to decline the call. After the stunt at the engagement party, after the invasion of my home, after the theft, I wanted nothing to do with that side of the family. I reached out to press the red button, but my finger hovered. What if? The question that keeps victims tethered to their abusers. What if this time it is real? What if I ignore it and I am wrong? I excused myself, stepping out into the hallway where the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the gray skyline of Manhattan. I answered the phone, my voice sharp and defensive. Make it quick. Sarah, I am working. There was no screeching this time, no self-righteous indignation. Sarah's voice was small, trembling, stripped of its usual venom. Elizabeth, she whispered, it is your mother. It is real this time. The ambulance just left. It is her heart. A cold stone dropped into the pit of my stomach. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass of the window. If this is another game, Sarah, Sao Yu Jinghao Ling, R. Jinghao Dayu, it is not a game. She sobbed. We are at St. Jude's. She collapsed in the garden. Please. Elizabeth, she is asking for you. The drive to the hospital was a different kind of torture than the night of the party. That night had been frantic, adrenaline-fueled panic. This drive was heavy, suffocating dread. I knew, with a daughter's instinct, that this was not a prank. The universe has a cruel sense of irony. It loves to punish you with the very thing you were mocked for fearing. I arrived at St. Jude's Medical Center just as the sun was beginning to set, casting long, bloody streaks across the sky. I parked my Audi in the garage and ran toward the entrance, my heels clicking a frantic rhythm on the concrete. Room 304, cardiac kata unit. I stopped outside the door. Through the small, rectangular window, I could see them. It was a tableau of a family that did not include me. My mother looked tiny in the hospital bed, a fragile bird lost in a nest of white sheets and tangled wires. The heart monitor beeped with a slow, irregular rhythm. Sitting on the right side of the bed was Kevin. He was holding her hand, his head bowed in what looked like prayer. Aunt Sarah stood on the other side, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. They looked like the grieving, devoted family. I looked like the intruder in my tailored business suit, clutching a designer handbag. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I pushed the door open. Mom? I called out softly. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. It was as if I had sucked the oxygen out of the space. Kevin looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed. For a second, I wondered if he was actually sad. But then I saw the flicker of calculation behind his gaze. Sarah stiffened. She placed a protective hand on my mother's shoulder, as if shielding her from a predator. My mother turned her head slowly on the pillow. Her face was pale, her lips having a blue tint. She looked at me, and I expected to see relief. I expected to see love. Instead, I saw fear. "Mom, I am here," I said, taking a step forward. I came as soon as I heard. "How are you feeling? Stay back." "Sarah," he said, "do not upset her." "Elizabeth, you have done enough." I ignored her. I focused only on the woman who had raised me. "Mom, what is going on?" My mother pulled her hand away from Kevin and clutched the bedsheet. Her voice was weak, raspy, but the words were clear enough to shatter my heart. "Why, Elizabeth?" she whispered. A tear leaked from the corner of her eye. "Why do you hate me so much?" I froze. I felt like I had been slapped. "Hate you? Mom, I love you. I have been taking care of you for years." "What are you talking about?" My mother shook her head. Erratic, jerky motion. "Kevin told me. He told me everything." I looked at Kevin. He was staring at the floor, shaking his head sorrowfully. "What did you tell her?" I demanded, my voice rising. "What lies are you feeding her?" "Kevin, I told her the truth." "Liz," Kevin said softly, his voice thick with fake emotion. "I could not let you do it to her. Not when she is this sick. It is not right. Do what?" I screamed. The heart monitor began to beep faster. "Sell the house." My mother sobbed. "My home." "Elizabeth, your father built that deck. My roses are in that garden. How could you put it on the market without telling me?" I stared at her, my mouth hanging open. The accusation was so absurd, so completely fabricated, that my brain could not process it for a moment. "Mom, I am not selling your house. I would never do that." "Who told you that?" Kevin pulled a piece of paper from his pocket. It was a printout. He handed it to my mother. "I found the listing." "Mom," Kevin said gently, "she listed it last week. She needs the money to pay for her wedding debts. She's broke." "Mom, that is why she was so mad about the engagement party. She is drowning, and she is going to throw you out on the street to save herself." I snatched the paper from my mother's trembling hand. It was a Zillow listing. It was a picture of my mother's house. But the text, "Saoy Ding Haolin," 2# is greater than the text was fake. It was a doctored web page. I could see the mismatched fonts. I could see the clumsy Photoshop job on the for sale sign in the yard. "This is fake," I shouted, shaking the paper. "Mom, look at this. He made this on a computer. I have plenty of money. I am not selling your house." "Do not lie to her," Sarah shouted, stepping between me and the bed. "Just admit it." "Elizabeth, you have always been greedy. You care more about your image and your money than your own flesh and blood." My mother looked at me, her eyes wide with betrayal. She did not see the successful executive. She saw the monster they had painted, and in her weakened, medicated state, the fear was stronger than the logic. "I want you to leave," my mother whispered. The words were quiet, but they hit me with the force of a wrecking ball. "Mom, please, listen to me. Get out," she screamed, her voice cracking. Her heart monitor began to alarm. A high-pitched, continuous warning. "Get out of my room. You want me dead so you can take the money." Nurses rushed into the room. A doctor in a white coat pushed past me. "You need to step outside." "Ma'am," the doctor ordered, checking the monitors. "She is in distress. You are killing her." I stood there, paralyzed. I looked at Kevin. He was leaning over my mother, stroking her hair. "Sure, Mom, it is okay," he cooed. "I am here. I will not let her take the house. I promise." I was pushed out into the hallway. The door closed in my face, shutting me out of my mother's life. I stood in the corridor, leaning against the cold wall, gasping for air. I felt like I was drowning. They had turned her against me. They had used her sickness, her confusion, to plan a poison so deep I could not cut it out. 10 minutes later, the door opened. A man in a cheap suit walked out, carrying a leather briefcase. I recognized him. He was a notary public who advertised on billboards near the highway. Behind him came Kevin and Sarah. Kevin was smiling. It was not the mocking smile he usually wore. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated victory. He held up a document. "What is that?" I asked, my voice hollow. "Power of attorney," Kevin said, waving the paper in the air. "Durable power of attorney. Actually, including medical and financial decisions." I felt the blood drain from my face. "She signed it. She wants to be protected." "Liz," Kevin said, stepping closer to me. "She knows I am the only one who cares about her, not her assets. So, as of 5 minutes ago, I am in charge. I control her bank accounts. I control her medical care. And most importantly, Soyu Tinghaling, or Tinghao Dayu." He leaned in close, his breath hot against my ear. "I control the house. So, do not bother coming over to check on her. You are not welcome. If you step foot on her property, I will have you arrested for trespassing, just like you threatened me." I looked at the document. I saw my mother's shaky signature at the bottom. The ink was still wet. "You are going to drain her dry," I whispered. "You are going to steal every penny she has." Kevin shrugged. "I am going to take care of myself, just like you always have." He turned to Sarah. "Come on, Aunt Sarah. Let us go get some dinner. I am starving." They walked away down the sterile hospital corridor, their laughter echoing off the linoleum floors. I stood alone. I looked at the closed door of room 304. My mother was in there, believing that I was a villain. I had lost her, not to death, but to something far worse. I had lost her to a lie. I walked to the elevator. I pressed the button for the ground floor. As the metal doors slid shut, hiding the cardiac unit from view, I felt something inside me snap. It was a distinct physical sensation, like a rubber band breaking after being stretched too far. For 30 years, I had played by the rules. I had been the good daughter, the responsible sister, the forgiving fiancée. I had believed that if I worked hard and did the right thing, justice would prevail. I was wrong. Justice does not just happen. Justice is something you take. I thought about Mark, at home, probably deleting text messages and pretending to be asleep. I thought about Kevin, holding that power of attorney like a weapon. I thought about my mother, looking at me with hatred in her eyes. The elevator dinged. The doors opened to the lobby. I walked out, but I was not the same woman who had walked in. Elizabeth, the victim, died in that hospital room. Elizabeth, the daughter, was gone. I walked out into the cool night air. I did not cry. I did not shake. My hands were perfectly steady as I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I dialed a number. It was not a lawyer. It was not the police. It was a private investigator I had met once at a corporate security briefing. A man who specialized in digging up dirt that people thought was buried forever. "Sterling?" His gruff voice answered. "Mr. Vance," I said, my voice as cold and hard as a diamond. "I need to hire you." I need a full background check on 2 individuals, Kevin Miller and Mark Davison. I want everything. I continued, walking toward my car. I want their bank records. I want their phone logs. I want to know where they go, who they talk to, and what they owe. I want to know the name of every skeleton in their closets. There was a pause on the line. This sounds expensive. Miss Sterling, I do not care about the cost, I said, opening my car door. I have $50,000 in cash that was stolen from me. Find out where it went, and I will double your fee. I hung up the phone. I sat in the driver's seat and looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes were dry. My makeup was flawless. They wanted a villain? Fine. I started the engine. The powerful roar of the motor filled the garage. I would give them a villain they would never forget. Sleep deprivation is a form of torture. The Geneva Convention bans it. Intelligence agencies use it to break terrorists. And for the last 72 hours, my stepbrother had been using it to break me. It was 3 a.m. on Thursday. The bass from the guest room down the hall was not just a sound. It was a physical assault. It thumped against the walls of my skull. A rhythmic, low-frequency hammer that vibrated through the mattress and into my bones. Thump, thump, thump. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan, which was spinning lazily in the dark. My eyes felt as though someone had rubbed them with sandpaper. My head was throbbing with a pressure that felt dangerous, a tight band constricting around my temples. Mark lay beside me, snoring softly. He was wearing industrial-grade earplugs. I had asked for a pair 2 nights ago, and he had claimed he could not find the box. I knew he was lying. He was sleeping because he was allowed to sleep. I was the target. I kicked off the duvet. The room was stiflingly hot. I had set the thermostat to 68 degrees before bed, but I knew without looking that it was now set to 85. Kevin had been creeping out every hour to crank the heat up. It was a subtle, maddening war of attrition. I sat up, the room spinning slightly. I needed my medication. My doctor had diagnosed me with stress-induced hypertension 3 years ago. Without my lisinopril, my blood pressure would skyrocket, especially under this kind of duress. I stumbled into the ensuite bathroom and opened the medicine cabinet. My hand groped for the orange prescription bottle on the second shelf. My fingers brushed against empty glass. I blinked, switching on the vanity light. The sudden brightness stabbed my eyes. I looked at the shelf. The toothpaste was there. The face cream was there. Mark's razor was there. My blood pressure medication was gone. I began to tear the bathroom apart. I opened every drawer, checked the trash can, looked under the sink. Nothing. Panic began to rise in my chest. A cold tide mixing with the heat of the room. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs. An erratic, terrifying rhythm. He took them. I thought, he wants me to have a stroke. He wants to kill me without lifting a finger. I walked back into the bedroom. Mark continued to sleep, his chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm that made me want to scream. Mark, I rasped, shaking his shoulder. Mark, wake up. My pills are gone, he grunted, rolling over, pulling the pillow over his head. Mark, I shouted, my voice cracking. He sat up, pulling out one earplug, looking at me with groggy annoyance. What? What is it now? Liz? It is the middle of the night. Kevin stole my heart medication. I said, my hands shaking. I cannot find the bottle. My chest hurts. Mark, I feel like my head is going to explode. Mark rubbed his face. Liz, you probably just misplaced it. You have been so stressed lately. You are paranoid. Look in your purse. I checked my purse. I checked everywhere. He took them. Just go back to sleep. Mark groaned, lying back down. We will look for them in the morning. Just do some deep breathing exercises. You are hysterical. Hysterical. The word acted like a match dropped into a pool of gasoline. I looked at the bedroom door. The bass from down the hall seemed to get louder, mocking me. Thump, thump, thump. I was done. I was done being the victim. I was done being the responsible one who suffered in silence while the parasites fed on my life. I walked to the closet. In the back, behind the golf clubs Mark never used, was an aluminum baseball bat. I had bought it for self-defense years ago when I lived alone in the city. I picked it up. The metal was cool and heavy in my grip. It felt solid. It felt like a solution. Liz? Mark asked, sitting up again, his voice tinged with alarm. What are you doing with that? I did not answer him. I walked out of the bedroom. The hallway was sweltering. The air was thick and dry. I marched toward the guest room, the bat resting on my shoulder. The noise grew louder with every step, vibrating through the floorboards. I did not knock. I did not ask him to turn it down. I kicked the door open. The wood splintered around the lock, and the door swung inward, banging against the wall. Kevin, I screamed. The room was bathed in the harsh, white light of a ring light stand. Kevin was sitting on the edge of the bed. He was not sleeping. He was not surprised. He was waiting. He held his phone up. The camera lens pointed directly at me. On the screen, I could see the live interface of TikTok. Comments were scrolling up the side at a frantic pace. And here she is. Guys, Kevin narrated, his voice loud and theatrical. I told you. Look at her. She has got a weapon. I stood in the doorway, heaving for breath, sweat matting my hair to my forehead, clutching a baseball bat. I must have looked deranged. I must have looked exactly like the villain he had described to his audience. Give me my pills, I yelled, taking a step into the room. You stole my medication. You are trying to kill me. Kevin retreated to the corner of the room, keeping the phone between us like a shield. Whoa, put the bat down. Liz, you are scaring me. Guys, are you seeing this? She is off her meds. She is hallucinating. I do not have your pills. Liz, you are crazy. Liar. I swung the bat, smashing it into the lamp on the nightstand. The ceramic base shattered, sending shards flying across the room. Kevin screamed. A fake, high-pitched scream for the camera. Help. She is violent. She is destroying the house. Someone call 911. I raised the bat again, aiming for the stereo system that was still pumping out that infernal noise. Stop it? A voice shrieked from the corner of the room. I spun around. Sitting in the armchair in the shadows was Aunt Sarah. She was wearing a bathrobe, clutching a cup of tea. She had been there the whole time, watching, waiting for the show to start. Sarah? I gasped, lowering the bat slightly. What are you doing here? I am staying the night to protect my nephew, Sarah yelled, standing up. And thank God I did. You are a maniac. Elizabeth, look at you, threatening a boy with a bat. You belong in an asylum. It was a setup. The heat, the noise, the missing pills, Sarah in the corner. It was all a stage, and I had just walked onto it and delivered the performance of a lifetime. I heard the sirens before I saw the lights. They were close, too close. They must have been called before I even kicked the door down. Mark appeared in the doorway behind me. He looked at the shattered lamp. He looked at the bat in my hand. Liz, drop it, he said, his voice devoid of sympathy. The police are here. I looked at him, then I looked at the phone in Kevin's hand. I saw myself on the tiny screen, wild-eyed, sweating, armed. I dropped the bat. It clattered to the floor with a hollow metallic ring. The front door burst open downstairs. Heavy boots thundered up the stairs. Police dropped the weapon. 2 officers stormed into the room. They had their tasers drawn. "She dropped it," Mark said quickly, pointing at the bat on the floor. She dropped it, but she was swinging it at him. I looked at Mark. He was testifying against me before they even asked. One of the officers, a large man with no neck, grabbed my arm and spun me around. He shoved me against the wall. "Hands behind your back." Now, I did not resist. I felt the cold steel of the handcuffs click around my wrists. The metal bit into my skin. "Officer, please," I gasped, my chest tightening. "I have high blood pressure." He stole my medication. "They are gaslighting me. Save it for the judge," the officer said, tightening the cuffs. Kevin stepped forward, still filming. "Officer, I want to press charges." She broke down the door. She destroyed my property. She threatened to kill me. My aunt saw everything. I saw everything. Sarah chimed in, stepping into the light. She came in, screaming like a banshee. She said she was going to bash his brains in. I was terrified. The second officer looked at Sarah, then at the broken lamp. "We are going to need statements from everyone," he said. They dragged me out of the room. As I was led past Kevin, he turned the phone so that my face was in the frame one last time. "So sad. Guys," he whispered to his followers, "mental health is real. Pray for my sister." They marched me down the stairs, past the living room where my wedding gifts were still stacked in the corner, and out into the cool night air. The flashing blue lights illuminated the neighborhood. Mrs. Gable was on her porch in her nightgown, watching. The entire street was watching. Elizabeth Sterling, the woman who had it all, was being stuffed into the back of a police cruiser like a common criminal. I sat in the hard plastic seat, my hands numb behind my back. I watched as the officers spoke to Mark on the porch. Mark was shaking his head, looking sad, looking like the long-suffering partner of a crazy woman. After 20 minutes, the officer came back to the car. He opened the door. "Okay, Miss Sterling, here is the situation. Because this is a domestic incident and there was a weapon involved, and because there are 2 witnesses stating you were the aggressor, you are being placed under arrest for simple assault and disorderly conduct." He handed me a piece of paper. His partner uncuffed one of my hands so I could take it. "This is a temporary protective order," he said. "The victim, Mr. Kevin Miller, has requested an emergency order of protection." The judge on call granted it. I stared at the paper in the dim light. "What does this mean?" I whispered. "It means you cannot return to this address," the officer said. "You cannot have any contact with Kevin Miller. You cannot come within 100 yards of the residence. But Sao Ting Hao Ling 2# is greater than I own the residence." I stammered. "I pay the mortgage. My name is on the deed." "Does not matter," the officer said, shaking his head. "Until the hearing next week. He has possession of the dwelling. You need to tell us where you want to be dropped off. Do you have a friend? A hotel?" I looked at the house. My house. The lights were on in the guest room. I could see Kevin's silhouette in the window. He was probably celebrating. "I have nowhere," I said. "Just Sao Ting Hao Ling. 2# is greater than take me to the Motel 6 by the highway." The officer closed the door. As the car pulled away, I turned my head to look back one last time. Mark was standing in the doorway. He watched the police car leave. Then, he turned around and walked back inside, closing the door on me. I sat in the dark, the tears finally coming. Not sobbing, just a silent, steady stream running down my face. I was homeless. I was a criminal. I was alone. But as the police car merged onto the highway, taking me to a flea-ridden motel room, the panic in my chest began to subside. It was replaced by a strange, cold clarity. The fear was gone. You cannot fear losing everything when you have already lost it. I closed my eyes and pictured Kevin's face on the phone screen. I pictured Mark's betrayal. Enjoy the house. I thought, enjoy the victory lap, because when I come back, I am not coming back with a baseball bat. I am coming back with the truth, and it is going to hurt a lot more than aluminum. The neon sign outside my window flickered with a rhythmic, nauseating buzz. It cast a sickly pink glow across the cheap polyester bedspread of the motel room. I sat cross-legged on the bed, surrounded by the smell of stale cigarette smoke and industrial cleaner. My expensively tailored suit, now wrinkled and smelling of sweat, hung in the open closet like a ghost of the woman I used to be. I was Elizabeth Sterling, Vice President of Marketing. I commanded a team of 40 people. I managed $1 million budgets, and yet, here I was, eating a vending machine sandwich in a room that cost $59 a night, hiding from the police and my own family. But I was not idle. On the small, scarred laminate desk in front of me, my laptop was open. The screen glowed with the only thing keeping me sane: the live feed from the hidden cameras I had installed days ago. I watched my own living room in high definition. It was strange seeing your sanctuary violated from a third-person perspective. It felt like watching a movie, a dark satire of domestic life. Kevin was there. Of course, he was lying on my Italian leather sofa, his bare feet resting on the cushions. He was eating pizza directly from the box, wiping his greasy hands on the throw pillows I had imported from Milan. But he was not alone. Mark walked into the frame. My fiancé, the man who had stood on the porch and watched the police take me away. He was holding 2 glasses of my vintage Cabernet. He handed one to Kevin. "Here you go, buddy," Mark said. His voice was clear, picked up perfectly by the microphone hidden in the Universal Serial Bus charger block. "Thanks, bro," Kevin said, taking the glass. He took a long swig, swirling the expensive wine like it was grape juice. "Man, I cannot believe that worked. I thought for sure she was going to bash my head in with that bat." Mark chuckled. He sat down in the armchair opposite Kevin. He looked relaxed. He looked comfortable. "You pushed her buttons perfectly," Mark said. "Liz is predictable. She needs control. You take away her control. You take away her meds, and she snaps. It is simple chemistry." I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. Hearing him analyze my breakdown like a science experiment made my skin crawl. But the next sentence made my heart stop completely. "So, when do we get the money?" Mark asked. Kevin burped. "Relax. I have the power of attorney now. I am listing Mom's house on Monday. The market is hot. We should get a cash offer within a week. Once the funds clear, I will transfer your cut." "My cut?" Mark repeated, staring into his wine glass. 30%. That was the deal. 30%. Kevin agreed. "That should be enough to cover your little problem with the bookies, right?" Mark winced. "Yeah, if I do not pay them by the end of the month, they are going to start breaking fingers." and Liz was starting to ask questions about the joint account. She noticed the withdrawals. I felt a physical blow to my chest. I gasped, pressing a hand over my mouth to stifle a sob. It was not just Kevin. It was Mark. My fiancé was not a coward. He was a co-conspirator. He had a gambling debt. He had been skimming from our accounts. And when he got desperate, he had aligned himself with the devil to liquidate my mother's assets. Kevin laughed on the screen. You know, the funniest part was the safe. Mark smiled, a sly, ugly expression I had never seen before. Yeah, she really thought you guessed the code. 1984. She is so sentimental. I gave you that code, Mark said, clinking his glass against Kevin's, because I knew you had the balls to clean it out. So, where is the jewelry? Mark asked. Pawned it yesterday. Kevin said, got $12,000 for the lot. It is already gone to the sharks. Just a down payment to keep them off my back until the house sells. I closed the laptop. I sat in the pink gloom of the motel room, staring at the blank wall. The silence was deafening. The betrayal was total. There was no misunderstanding. There was no gray area. The man I loved and the brother I tolerated had joined forces to dismantle my life for cash. They were eating my food, drinking my wine, and laughing about my destruction. I did not cry. The time for tears had passed. A cold, hard resolve settled into my bones, replacing the panic and the heartbreak. It was the feeling of steel hardening in fire. I stood up and walked to the bathroom. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were dark, shadowed by exhaustion, but they were clear. I washed my face. I brushed my hair. I applied a layer of red lipstick, sharp and precise. I am not a victim. I whispered to my reflection, I am the retribution. I grabbed my purse and my car keys. I had an appointment. The diner was located on the outskirts of town, a place where truckers and insomniacs gathered to drink sludge that passed for coffee. I slid into the booth at the back. Mr. Vance was already there. The private investigator was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite and left out in the rain for too long. He wore a rumpled trench coat and smelled of tobacco. He did not smile when I sat down. He simply slid a thick manila envelope across the table. You were right, Vance grunted, taking a sip of his coffee. Your stepbrother is in deep. I opened the envelope. Inside were photographs, grainy, long lens shots of Kevin meeting with men who looked like they strangled people for a living. Who are they? I asked, studying a picture of Kevin looking terrified while a large man held him by the collar of his jacket. Eastern European Syndicate, Vance said. Serious people. They run an illegal sports betting ring out of Bridgeport. Your boy Kevin owes them $150,000. 150? I looked up. I thought it was less. Interest, Vance said. These guys charge 10% a week. He is drowning, and the deadline is next Friday. If he does not pay, they do not sue him. They disappear him. I nodded slowly. It all made sense. The desperation, the fake stroke, the rush to get power of attorney. He needed my mother's house money to save his own life. And Mark? I asked. Vance pulled out another sheet of paper. Mark Davison, online poker addict. He is down $40,000 across 3 different credit cards. He is also being blackmailed by a woman he met on a dating app 6 months ago. We found the transaction logs. He has been paying her hush money to keep photos from reaching you. I felt a wave of nausea, but I pushed it down. Mark was not just a gambler. He was a cheater and a fool. This is everything I needed, I said, placing my hand on the envelope. So, what is the plan? Vance asked. You take this to the police? I looked at the photos of the dangerous men threatening Kevin. I looked at the bank statements showing Mark's betrayal. No, I said softly. The police move too slow. The police will arrest them. Sure, they will get bail. They will get lawyers. It will drag on for years. I closed the envelope. I want them to suffer. Mr. Vance, I want them to feel exactly what I felt. The panic, the hopelessness, the total loss of control. Vance raised an eyebrow. That sounds dangerous. I reached into my purse and pulled out a stack of cash. The withdrawal I had made from my personal rainy day account before the banks closed. I slid it across the table. Find out exactly who these loan sharks are. I said, find out their names. Find out where they hang out. And then, I want you to deliver a message. To the loan sharks? No. I said, a cold smile touching my lips. To Kevin's creditors. Tell them that Kevin Miller has come into a large inheritance. Tell them he is throwing a party at his sister's house to celebrate paying everyone back. Vance stared at me for a long moment. Then, a slow grin spread across his weathered face. You are setting him up. I am just organizing a social event. I said, standing up, and I want to make sure all the very important persons are invited. I walked out of the diner into the cool night air. The wind felt bracing. I drove back to the motel, my mind racing with the logistics of the final act. I had been playing checkers while they were playing chess, but now I was flipping the board. They wanted the house? Fine, they could have the house. I was going to give them a housewarming party that would burn their lives to the ground. The plan required precision, theater, and a complete suppression of my conscience. I spent the next 3 days in that motel room, orchestrating the destruction of my own life to pave the way for theirs. Step 1 was the surrender. I called Mark. I made my voice tremble. I apologized. I told him I was broken, that the motel was awful, that I missed him. I told him I was ready to sign whatever papers Kevin wanted, just to have my family back. Mark bought it. Of course he did. His ego needed to believe he had won. Liz, honey, that is so mature of you, he said, his voice dripping with condescending relief. We just want to move forward. Kevin is willing to drop the restraining order if you agree to host a peace offering dinner. A fresh start, a dinner. It was perfect. I agreed. I told him to invite everyone. Mom, if she was well enough. Aunt Sarah, Kevin's friends. I even suggested we do it on Friday night. The same night Mr. Vance had confirmed Kevin's debt was due. On Friday afternoon, the restraining order was lifted. I drove back to my house. It looked the same from the outside, but inside, the air felt stale. My home had been tainted. I walked through the living room, noting the stains on the carpet, the scratches on the hardwood. I did not care. This house was no longer a home. It was a trap. I spent the afternoon cooking. I made a roast. I set the table with my finest china. I arranged fresh flowers. I put on a stunning black dress. Not a morning dress, but a dress for an executioner. At 7 o'clock, the guests began to arrive. Mark was first. He hugged me, his embrace feeling like a snake coiling around its prey. You look great, Liz. He lied. You seem saluting howling. Does Cardinal MIR calm? I am. I smiled. I have had a lot of time to think. Kevin and Aunt Sarah arrived next, pushing my mother in a wheelchair. Mom looked frail, her eyes darting nervously around the room. She would not look at me. Kevin, however, was strutting. He wore a new suit, bought with pawn jewelry money. No doubt. Hey, sis, Kevin said, clapping me on the back. Glad you came to your senses. No hard feelings. Right? No hard feelings. I echoed. Then came Kevin's friends. The entourage. The same tattooed crowd from the drug party. They piled in, grabbing beers from the cooler Kevin had set up in the foyer. But the most important guests arrived at 7:30. The doorbell rang. I will get it, I called out from the kitchen. I opened the door to reveal 3 men. They were not wearing hoodies. They were wearing expensive, ill-fitting suits. The man in the front was huge, with a shaved head and a scar running through his left eyebrow. Mr. Volkov? I asked pleasantly. The man looked at me with cold, dead eyes. We are here for Kevin. We heard there is a celebration. Please, come in, I said, stepping aside. Kevin is in the dining room. He is expecting you. I led the wolves into the den of the sheep. The dining room was crowded. The chatter died down as the 3 large strangers entered. Kevin looked up from his wine glass. His smile froze. His face went the color of cottage cheese. Mr. Volkov walked straight up to Kevin. The room was silent enough to hear a pin drop. Kevin, Volkov said, his voice a deep rumble. We got a message. We heard you came into some money. We heard you are paying everyone back tonight, Kevin stammered. Sao Yuting Haoling. Sao Yuting Haoling. 2 hash is greater than who told you that? Your sister. Volkov said, gesturing to me. She said you are flush. So, where is our 150? Mark stood up, trying to play the peacemaker. Whoa, gentlemen, this is a private party. Maybe we can discuss business later? Volkov turned to Mark. And you must be the gambling partner. We know about you too. 40,000, right? Mark sat down abruptly, his mouth shutting with an audible click. Aunt Sarah stood up, her face red. Who are these people? Elizabeth, did you invite these thugs? This is supposed to be a family dinner. I walked to the head of the table. I picked up a remote control. Actually, Sarah, I said, my voice projecting clearly across the room. I thought we should clear the air before we eat. I have prepared a little presentation to celebrate our Sao Yuting Haoling. 2 hash is greater than fresh start. I pressed a button. The large flat-screen television on the wall flickered to life. The video footage from the hidden camera played. It was the scene from the night I was at the motel. Mark and Kevin, drinking wine. So, when do we get the money? Mark's voice on the screen asked. I have the power of attorney now. I am listing Mom's house on Monday. Sao Yuting Haoling. 2 hash is greater than. Once the funds clear, I will transfer your cut. Gasps echoed around the room. My mother, sitting in her wheelchair, stared at the screen. Her hand flew to her mouth. I pawned it yesterday. Sao Yuting Haoling. 2 hash is greater than. Got $12,000 for the lot. Kevin's voice continued. The video cut to another clip. Kevin laughing about faking the stroke. Mark admitting he gave Kevin the safe code. I paused the video on a freeze frame of Kevin and Mark clinking glasses, celebrating their crime. I looked around the room. Mark was staring at the table, pale and sweating. Kevin was shaking, looking frantically between Volkov and the exit. Aunt Sarah had collapsed into her chair, stunned into silence. My mother looked at Kevin. Her eyes were filled with tears, but this time, they were tears of clarity. Kevin? She whispered. You, Sao Yuting Haoling. 2 hash is greater than you lied? About everything? Kevin tried to speak. Mom, No, it is a deep fake. She edited it. Volkov stepped forward. He placed a heavy hand on Kevin's shoulder. Deep fake? He asked. The money you owe me is not fake, Kevin. And if you do not have it, Sao Jinghao Ling, R Jinghao Dayu. He did not finish the sentence. He did not have to. I picked up my wine glass. The police are on their way, I announced calmly. I called them 5 minutes ago. I reported a massive fraud, grand larceny, and Sao Jinghao Ling, 2 hashes greater than, oh yes, the presence of known organized crime members on my property. Panic erupted. Kevin's friends bolted for the back door. Volkov looked at me. He nodded. A strange gesture of respect. Then he grabbed Kevin by the collar of his new suit. We are leaving, Volkov said to Kevin. We need to have a conversation before the cops get here. No, Kevin screamed, flailing. Mom, help me. Mark, do something. Mark did nothing. He was frozen in terror. Volkov dragged Kevin toward the door. Kevin grabbed onto the door frame, screaming, begging, let him go. My mother cried weakly, trying to stand up, but Volkov yanked him loose. They disappeared out the front door, dragging my stepbrother into the darkness. Sirens began to wail in the distance. I looked at Mark. Get out, I said. Liz, please. Mark stammered. Standing up, I can explain. It was just Sao Jinghao Ling. 2 hash is greater than I was in over my head. I never meant to hurt you. I walked over to him. I reached out and took his hand. He looked hopeful for a second. Then I pulled the diamond engagement ring off my finger. I dropped it into his wine glass. It sank to the bottom with a soft clink. Take it, I said. Maybe it is enough to pay off your poker debt, but you will never step foot in this house again. Mark looked at me, then at the ring. He grabbed the glass and ran out the back door, fleeing like a rat from a sinking ship. The room was empty now, except for me, my mother, and Aunt Sarah. Sarah was sobbing quietly. My mother was weeping, her face buried in her hands. I did not go to comfort them. I poured myself a glass of wine. I walked to the window and watched the police cruisers pull into the driveway. They were too late for Kevin, but they would find the evidence I had left for them on the coffee table. The flash drive with all the recordings. The fallout was complete. My reputation in the neighborhood was probably ruined. The gossip would last for years. Elizabeth Sterling, the woman who invited the mob to dinner. But as I took a sip of the wine, watching the red and blue lights dance across my lawn, I felt a strange, terrifying peace. The cancer had been cut out. The surgery was brutal, and the patient was scarred. But the infection was gone. I turned back to my mother. I am sorry you had to see that. Mom, I said quietly. My mother looked up. Her eyes were haunted. Elizabeth, she whispered. What have we done? We survived. I said, that is all. I sat down at the head of the table, alone in my victory, and waited for the police to knock on the door. The sirens were no longer a distant wail. They were a cacophony right outside my front door. The red and blue lights strobed through the living room windows, painting the walls in violent, alternating washes of color. It looked like a disco for the damned. I sat at the head of the dining table, my hands folded on the tablecloth. The roast beef I had spent 3 hours preparing sat in the center of the table, cold and uncut. It was a centerpiece for a meal that would never be eaten. My mother was still weeping. A soft, rhythmic sound that grated on my nerves. Aunt Sarah was silent, staring at the tablecloth as if the pattern held the answers to why her universe had just imploded. The front door opened, not with a kick this time, but with the authoritative push of law enforcement. "Police, is anyone here? In the dining room?" I called out. My voice was calm, unnaturally so. 2 officers entered. It was Sergeant Miller again, the same weary man who had told me I could not evict Kevin a week ago. He stopped when he saw me. He looked at the empty chairs, the wine glasses half full, the weeping old woman in the wheelchair. "Miss Sterling?" he asked, lowering his flashlight. "We got a call about a disturbance, and something about Saoyuting Haling, the cancelletto e maggiore di the Russian mafia." I stood up. I smoothed the skirt of my black dress. "The disturbance is over, Sergeant," I said. "I believe you will find the perpetrator. Kevin Miller, a few blocks down the road. He was forcibly removed by some of his creditors. I imagine they left him somewhere conspicuous for you to find." Miller looked confused. Then his radio crackled. "Dispatch to Miller. We have a male subject found zip-tied to a stop sign on Elm Street. He has been assaulted. He is screaming that his sister set him up. Subject is identified as Kevin Miller." Miller looked at me. His eyes narrowed. I picked up the flash drive from the table. "This contains evidence of grand larceny, of round, forgery, and conspiracy to commit theft," I said, extending the drive to him. "It also contains video confessions from Kevin Miller and Mark Davison regarding the theft of $50,000 and family heirlooms from this property." Miller took the drive. He looked at it, then at me. "You planned this," he said. It was not a question. I acted in self-defense. "Sergeant," I replied coolly. "I merely facilitated a meeting between my stepbrother and the people he owed money to. Whatever happened after they left my property is not my concern." Miller shook his head, a mixture of disbelief and grudging respect on his face. "We are going to need you to come down to the station, Miss Sterling, to give a formal statement." "Of course," I said. "I will drive myself." I turned to my mother. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. She reached out a trembling hand. "Elizabeth," she choked out. "I did not know. I swear I did not know." He told me, "Saoyuting Haling, 2 hashes greater than he told me you were the enemy." I looked at her hand. It was the hand that had held mine when I was a child. It was also the hand that had signed a power of attorney giving a predator the right to destroy me. Ignorance is not an excuse. "Mom," I said softly, "you chose to believe him because it was easier. You chose him because he needed you, and I did not. That is your sin, Elizabeth. Please." "Saoyuting Haoling, 2 hashes greater than Aunt Sarah started. Save it." "Sarah," I cut her off. "You can explain it to the judge. You were a witness to the theft. You saw the jewelry. You knew. You are an accessory." Sarah's mouth snapped shut. Her face went pale. I walked out of the dining room, past the wreckage of the party, and out into the night. The cool air felt like a baptism. I walked past the police cruisers. Down the street, I could see an ambulance loading a stretcher. Kevin was on it. He was conscious. He was wailing, thrashing against the restraints. "My sister did this. She is a witch. She is crazy." I watched for a moment. I felt nothing. No pity. No joy. Just the clinical satisfaction of a problem being solved, like balancing a spreadsheet. I got into my Audi. I looked at the passenger seat where Mark used to sit. It was empty. Mark was gone. He was probably halfway to the state line by now, running from his debts and his shame. It did not matter. He was a weak man, Weak men destroy themselves eventually. They do not need help. I started the engine, the house behind me, the beautiful colonial revival with the manicured lawn, loomed in the rearview mirror. It was the symbol of everything I had worked for: perfection, status, security. But as I pulled away, leaving the sirens and the flashing lights behind, I realized it was just a building of wood and stone. It had never been a home. A home is a place where you are safe. I had never been safe there. I drove to the police station with a steady hand. I gave my statement with the precision of a surgeon. I handed over the evidence. I signed the papers. When I walked out of the station, it was 3 a.m. The city was quiet. I sat in my car and stared at the steering wheel. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a vast, hollow crater in my chest. I was exhausted. My bones ached. I had won. The enemy was vanquished. The castle was reclaimed. So why did I feel like I was the one who had been hollowed out? I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes. Tears finally leaked out, hot and stinging, not for Kevin, not for Mark, but for the version of Elizabeth Sterling who had believed, just for a moment, that she could have a happy family dinner, that Elizabeth was dead. She had died in the dining room, somewhere between the roast beef and the arrival of the Russian mob. The woman who opened her eyes a moment later was someone new, someone harder, someone who would never, ever let anyone inside the walls again. 6 months later, the view from the 45th floor of the spiraling glass tower in Manhattan was breathtaking. Central Park lay spread out below like a green velvet runner, surrounded by the gray concrete canyons of the city. I stood on the balcony, wrapping my cashmere cardigan tighter around myself against the October wind. In my hand was a glass of Pinot Noir, a 1996 vintage, far superior to the swill I had served at that disastrous dinner. My phone buzzed on the glass table inside. I ignored it. I knew who it was. My mother called every Sunday at 4 o'clock. She left voicemails. She apologized. She told me about her physical therapy. She told me she had revoked the power of attorney and that the house, her house, was safe. I never picked up. I listened to the voicemails sometimes, in the dark, with a glass of wine, but I never called back. Forgiveness is a luxury I could no longer afford. Forgiveness is a crack in the armor, and I had learned the hard way that cracks are where the knife gets in. I walked back inside. The apartment was a masterpiece of modern design. White marble floors, chrome accent, minimalist furniture that cost more than most people earned in a year. It was cold. It was sterile. It was perfect. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop to check the news. Local news update. Kevin Miller sentenced to 5 years for fraud and grand larceny. I clicked on the article. There was a picture of Kevin in an orange jumpsuit. He looked thinner. The arrogance was gone from his eyes, replaced by a dull, feral fear. The article mentioned that he had taken a plea deal to avoid charges related to the loan sharks. He was safer in prison than he was on the street. I felt a flicker of satisfaction, but it was brief. Justice had been served, but it did not give me back the time I had lost. It did not give me back the trust. I scrolled down. Mark had filed for bankruptcy 3 months ago. He had lost his job after the scandal became public. The last I heard, he was living in a basement apartment in New Jersey, working as a shift manager at a logistics center. I closed the browser. I stood up and walked to the wall of windows. The city lights were beginning to twinkle on as dusk fell. Millions of people out there, millions of families, millions of lies. I was alone. There were no noises in this apartment. No bass thumping through the floor. No whispers of conspiracy. No fake laughter. Just silence. Some people might call it lonely. They might look at my empty living room, my table set for one, and feel pity. They would say, "Poor Elizabeth. She has everything, but she has no one." Let them say it. They did not understand. Loneliness is the price of freedom. Solitude is the tax you pay for safety. I took a sip of wine. The liquid was rich and complex on my tongue. I had my career. I had my money. I had my dignity. And most importantly, I had control. Absolute, unwavering control. I looked at my reflection in the glass window. The woman staring back was beautiful, sharp, and terrifying. She was a fortress. I raised my glass to her, to us. I whispered to the empty room. I turned away from the window and walked into the kitchen to pour another glass. The bottle clinked against the rim. A crisp, solitary sound. I was the queen of a cold, quiet kingdom, and for the first time in my life, I could sleep at night